My dad ignored me my entire life while he worshipped my brother. But when DNA tests revealed who his real biological son was, the dollar, 200K, inheritance, and family business were just the beginning of his downfall. I'm 21 years old. I work in my family's HVAC business. Well, technically my dad's side, and I need to tell this story because basically everything exploded like 6 months ago, and I'm still processing the absolute disaster my life became. I mean, everyone's life. I guess I should start at the beginning, although the real beginning is complicated because it involves things that happened before I was born. But what I remember perfectly is growing up always being the son my dad, Stephen, barely tolerated while my older brother Jordan was literally perfect in his eyes. I grew up in that house feeling like something was wrong with me, you know? Jordan was 2 years older than me. And for as long as I can remember, my dad treated him like he was made of gold, while I was more like an annoyance he had to put up with. Jordan got good grades, and my dad would organize dinners to celebrate. I got good grades, and my dad would say something like, "That's fine, keep it up," without even looking at me. Jordan played soccer in high school, and my dad went to all his games with a camera and the whole show. I tried out for the basketball team, and my dad said he was too busy with the business to come watch me play. It was like that with everything, literally everything. And I grew up thinking maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was difficult or problematic or, I don't know, something that made my dad simply not love me the same way. My mom, Rachel, was different. She treated us both more or less the same. Although looking back, I think she overcompensated for dad's favoritism by being extra nice to me. But it's not like she was a perfect mother either. You know, there was something about her that I always felt was distant. Like she was there physically, but her mind was somewhere else. She worked part-time at an accounting office and spent a lot of time in her room when she was home, said she needed space to relax after work, and none of us thought much about it because that's how it had always been. The HVAC business was started by my grandpa like 40 years ago. It's a decent business. We're not rich, but we're not doing badly either. And my dad inherited it when my grandpa retired like 10 years ago, although my grandpa was still technically part owner until he died like 3 years ago. I started working there when I was 18, right after graduating high school, because I wasn't very clear about what I wanted to do with my life, and my dad said I could help with basic installations and repairs while I decided if I wanted to go to college or what. Jordan had already been working there since he was 17, obviously, and my dad was basically grooming him to eventually take over the business, teaching him everything about the administrative side, and taking him to meetings with important clients and all that, while I stayed doing the heavy work with the other technicians. The thing is, I never understood why my dad treated me so differently. I tried asking him a couple times when I was younger, like when I was 14 or 15, and he would always get angry and say I was imagining things, that he loved us both the same. But it was a lie, and we both knew it. Jordan didn't help much either. He enjoyed being the favorite. He never admitted it, but you could see it in how he acted, with that confidence of knowing Dad would always be on his side. I learned to just accept it, I guess. I resigned myself to being the secondary son, the plan B, the one who was there just in case, but was never going to be really important. Everything changed 6 months ago when my dad was cleaning the attic. He was looking for some old boxes of tools from my grandpa because he needed something specific for a job, and he found a box of my mom's stuff that she had stored up there years ago and apparently forgot about. Inside there were like old diaries, photos, letters, that kind of stuff. And my dad, being my dad, decided to go through everything because I guess he was bored or curious or whatever. What? He found basically destroyed everything. My mom had had an affair, but not a short affair or a one-night mistake. No. An affair that lasted years with a guy who had died like 12 years ago, and she wrote everything in her diaries, all the details, the dates, the places where they met, everything. My dad read all that and well, he got like I'd never seen him. He came home that night, and I was in the living room watching TV, and he walked in with those diaries in his hand and his face completely red, the veins in his neck bulging, and he yelled for my mom to come down immediately. I'm not going to lie. It was horrible. My dad yelled things at her. I never thought I'd hear from him, and my mom started crying and saying it had been a long time ago, that it didn't mean anything anymore, that please forgive her, but my dad was beyond listening to reason. Jordan came home like half an hour later. He'd been at his girlfriend's house and walked into the middle of the chaos, not understanding anything. My dad told both of us to go to our rooms, that this was between him and Mom, but I stayed on the stairs listening because I needed to know what was happening. That night, I heard my dad say something that left me frozen. He said that my grandpa had always suspected Mom had been unfaithful, that my grandpa never completely trusted her, and that's why he had put a specific clause in his will, a clause that said the inheritance, including his part of the business and a considerable amount of money, would only go to his biological grandchildren. At that moment, I didn't completely understand the implication. I just thought my grandpa had been paranoid or something. But my dad obviously understood perfectly what that meant. The next few days were weird. My parents barely spoke to each other. My mom stayed in the guest room, and my dad seemed to be constantly thinking about something. You could see on his face that he was processing something big. A week later, he called Jordan and me to the living room and told us we were going to get DNA tests. All three of us, him and us too, because he needed to know the truth. Jordan turned pale immediately. I think in that moment he also understood what could happen, but I honestly wasn't that worried. Part of me thought that maybe if it turned out I wasn't his biological son, I would finally have an explanation for why he'd treated me so badly my whole life, you know? Like it would finally make sense. We went to a private lab. They took saliva samples, and they told us the results would take like 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the most tense of my life. The house was in complete silence. Nobody talked about anything important. We just spent time waiting. My dad kept working, but you could see he wasn't focused. Jordan was constantly nervous, and my mom basically hid in her room all the time. The results came on a Tuesday afternoon. My dad picked them up personally from the lab and got home around 6. He gathered us all in the living room again, opened the envelopes, and read the results out loud. I was Steven's biological son, 99.9% certainty. No doubt. Jordan was not his biological son, 0% probability of paternity, also without any doubt. The silence after that was probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever experienced in my life. My mom immediately started crying. Jordan just sat there like in shock, not saying anything, and my dad just stared at the papers with his hands shaking. I didn't know how to feel. Honestly, part of me felt a kind of strange vindication, like I finally had evidence that I hadn't been crazy all these years. That there was a real reason why my dad treated me differently. But another part of me just felt sadness for Jordan because it wasn't his fault, you know? He didn't ask to be born from an affair. My dad eventually spoke. He told my mom to leave the room, that he needed to talk to us two alone, and she went upstairs crying. Then my dad looked at both of us and said, "Well, this changes everything." And Jordan started to say something, but my dad interrupted him and said he needed time to think, that this was too big to process in a moment. The next few days were horrible. Jordan tried to talk to my dad several times, but my dad avoided him. And I felt trapped in the middle, not knowing what to do or say. But then something in me changed. I started remembering all the years of being treated like trash, all the moments when my dad chose Jordan over me, all the times I felt invisible in my own family, and I started to feel something I didn't expect to feel. I felt anger. A lot of anger. A week after the results, I told my dad I needed to talk to him privately. We went to his home office, and I told him straight up, if I had been the one who wasn't your biological son, you would have kicked me out of the house immediately. You know it and I know it, so why is Jordan still here? My dad went quiet, tried to say something about it being more complicated than that he'd raised Jordan for 23 years, that he couldn't just kick him out like nothing, but I didn't let him finish. I told him, you treated me like shit my whole life because you thought I wasn't your son. And it turns out the one who's not your son is him. So either you treat him the way you would have treated me, or this doesn't make sense. I know it sounds horrible, and it probably is, but you need to understand that I had spent 21 years being the unwanted son, and suddenly I had the opportunity for things to be different, for my dad to finally see me as his real son. And I wasn't going to waste that opportunity feeling bad for Jordan when he had enjoyed being the favorite all this time, without ever thinking about how it affected me. My dad took 2 more days, but eventually he told Jordan he had to leave the house, that he could take his stuff but needed to find another place to live. Jordan went hysterical, screamed that this was unfair, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he was still his son no matter what a test said, but my dad was determined. I was there when it happened. I stayed in my room listening to everything. And I'm not going to lie. Part of me felt good seeing Jordan finally experience what I had felt my whole life. But another part of me felt terrible because I knew this was going to destroy him. Jordan packed his things that same day, went to stay with a friend, and before he left, he looked at me with a hatred I'd never seen in him. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to say anything. His face said it all. My dad stayed in his room the rest of the day, didn't come down for dinner or anything. And I stayed in the living room feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt that I didn't know how to process. Like a week later, Jordan called me. I didn't want to answer, but eventually I did. And he started by telling me I was a son of a bitch, that I had destroyed the family out of revenge, that this was my fault. I tried to explain to him that I hadn't done anything except exist, that if anyone destroyed the family, it was Mom with her affairs. Then he said something that took me completely by surprise. He said that if I didn't convince Dad to let him come back, he was going to tell him about Mom's other affairs. I went quiet because I didn't know what he was talking about. What other affairs? Jordan laughed bitterly and said that Mom hadn't just had one affair. She'd had several over the years, and that he knew because he'd once overheard a conversation between Mom and her sister, our aunt, where Mom confessed everything. Jordan had never told Dad anything because he didn't want to cause problems. But now that he'd been kicked out, he had nothing to lose. I told him he was lying, that he was just trying to manipulate me, but he said he could prove it, that he had dates and names, and that if I didn't do something, he was going to tell Dad everything. I hung up the phone, feeling sick. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but something in his voice sounded true. And if it was true, then this was going to get way worse. I didn't tell my dad anything about the call. I thought maybe Jordan was bluffing and that if I didn't react, he would eventually calm down. But 2 days later, my dad came home early from work with a face I'd never seen on him, a mix of anger and something else. Something like betrayal, but multiplied by 1,000. Jordan had followed through on his threat. He'd gone to Dad's office and told him everything about Mom's other affairs, given him names, approximate dates, places, everything he knew. My dad confronted my mom that night, and this time I went downstairs because I needed to hear this directly, not from the stairs. My dad asked her if it was true that she'd had more affairs, not just the one with the guy who died, but others too. And my mom couldn't deny it. She started crying again and admitted yes, that there had been others over the years, that she had problems, that she needed help, that she was so sorry. My dad asked her how many, and Mom said she didn't know exactly. Maybe 4 or 5 total over 25 years of marriage. My dad was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that sounded final. He said, "I'm filing for divorce. There's no way to fix this. I don't want to try to fix it. I'm done." My mom tried to beg, said they could go to therapy, that she could change, that please don't leave her, but my dad had already made his decision. He told her she had a week to pack her things and find another place to live, that she could stay with her sister or wherever she wanted, but he didn't want her in the house. The next few days were surreal. My mom packed her things, crying constantly. She tried to talk to me several times, but I didn't know what to say to her. I was angry with her, but I also felt pity. She was my mom, after all. My dad hired a lawyer and started the divorce proceedings immediately, and my mom went to live with my aunt, her older sister who lives like 2 hours from here. Jordan tried to call me several times after that, but I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to him. He had tried to blackmail me, and when that didn't work, he went directly to destroy what little was left of the family. So in my opinion, he dug his own grave. My dad didn't want to talk to him either, changed the locks on the house and told him by text not to try to come over. I thought that would be the end of it, that we could finally start rebuilding something. Maybe my dad and I could have a real relationship for the first time in my life. But then like 2 months ago, Jordan sent me a long message, like a complete essay, where he said he'd been thinking a lot and had a plan to fix everything. His plan was basically a delusional fantasy where he convinced Dad to forgive Mom. Mom came back home, and we were all a happy family again, including him because according to Jordan, he was still part of the family, regardless of DNA. I responded that he was crazy, if he thought that was going to happen. That Dad was never going to forgive Mom after all this, and that he needed to accept reality and move on with his life. Jordan got angry and started sending me messages saying I had caused all this, that if I hadn't pressured Dad to kick him out, none of this would have happened, and that I was selfish and only thought about myself. I eventually blocked him because I couldn't deal with his guilt on top of everything else I was processing. Last week, something changed with my dad. He asked me to go to dinner together, just the two of us, at a restaurant we used to like when I was a kid. And during dinner, he apologized to me, told me he'd been a horrible father to me, that he'd treated me unfairly my whole life because he'd had suspicions he couldn't prove and had projected his resentment toward Mom onto me, and that he was so sorry that if he could go back in time and change how he treated me, would, but he couldn't. The only thing he could do was try to be better from here on out. I didn't know what to say. Honestly, I just sat there with my fork in my hand, watching my dad, this man who had always been so tough and emotionally closed off, break down in front of me. He had tears in his eyes and everything, and part of me wanted to tell him it was okay, that I forgave him. But another part was still angry about all those lost years. I told him I appreciated the apology but needed time to process everything, that I couldn't just forget 21 years of feeling unwanted just because now we knew the truth. My dad understood, said he didn't expect me to forgive him immediately, that he just wanted me to know he was sorry and that he was going to try to make it up any way he could. Since then, things have been weird between us. Not bad exactly, but definitely weird. Like we're learning to know each other for the first time despite having lived together my whole life. The divorce is being finalized now, should be ready in a couple months, and my dad already talked to the lawyers about Grandpa's will. Turns out I'm going to inherit Grandpa's part of the business, plus a considerable amount of money, like $200,000. Because I'm the only biological grandson, Jordan doesn't get any of that, obviously. My dad is also reviewing his own will to make sure I'm the only heir to his part of the business when he's gone, which is good, I guess, but also weird, because I never thought I'd be worrying about inheritances at 21. I haven't talked to my mom in like 2 months. She sends me messages every now and then asking how I am, saying she misses me, but I don't know how to feel about her. On one hand, she's still my mom and I love her, but on the other hand, she's the reason all this happened. If she hadn't had all those affairs, none of this would have exploded like this. Jordan unblocked me a few weeks ago and sent me another long message, apologizing for trying to blackmail me, saying he was desperate and scared and didn't know what to do. But I haven't responded. I don't know if I want to have a relationship with him after all this. The truth is, we were never really close anyway. So, here I am, living with my dad in this house that feels empty now, working in the business that's eventually going to be mine, trying to process the fact that my whole life changed in 6 months because of a box of old diaries in the attic. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing by pressuring my dad to kick Jordan out, if I should have kept quiet and let things develop naturally. But then I remember all those years of being the unwanted son, and I think maybe Jordan needed to feel even just a little bit of what I felt my whole life, to understand the damage that favoritism caused, even though technically it wasn't his direct fault. I don't know if this family will ever heal completely. I honestly doubt it'll ever be what it was, but I also don't know if I want it to be what it was, because what it was also bad, at least for me. Maybe this is better. Maybe we needed everything to explode, so we could rebuild something real instead of continuing to live in a lie. Or maybe I'm trying to justify the disaster I helped create. I don't know. The truth is, I don't have the answers, and probably never will, completely. What I do know is that my dad looked at me the other day while we were working on an installation, really looked at me like he never had before, and told me he was proud of me, that I was a good worker and a good son, and it was the first time in my life I heard those words from him, and they sounded genuine. It doesn't fix everything, doesn't even fix half of everything, but it's something. I guess it's a start.